When I first came across this story, I couldn't believe what I was reading. It's been a long time since I've seen so much filth packed into one situation. Betrayal disguised as payback, swingers running wild, and even a pair of lost panties thrown into the mix. Honestly, if I had been in that mess, I'd probably be fully gray by now. So, buckle up and enjoy this roller coaster of a tale. Hey, everyone. I guess what really sticks with me the most is how completely clueless I was through all of this. We've all heard those stories, right? Someone's spouse cheats, and we're sitting there thinking, how did they not see it coming? But let me tell you, it's not as clear-cut when you're the one in the middle of it. You go about your life, assuming everything's fine, and you don't exactly go digging into your wife's personal life. Why would you? You got your own shit to deal with. Lisa, well, she didn't exactly wave any giant red flags. Or maybe she did, but I was too wrapped up in my own world to notice. I should have noticed, but I didn't. See, Lisa was always on the go, always caught up in something. She had her constant meetings, plans, work events, stuff I honestly couldn't care less about. She'd ramble on about her office drama, promotions, who was hooking up with who at work, and I'd just nod like I gave a damn. Looking back, maybe I should have tuned in more. Maybe if I had listened a little closer, I wouldn't have been blindsided the way I was. But you know what they say? Hindsight is always 20/20ths. All right, let's take it from the top. Lisa, my wife, or at least she was my wife back then, cheated on me. But not in the way you'd typically imagine. Oh no, this wasn't just your run-of-the-mill affair where she's sneaking off behind my back. No, it was much worse. She did it with my best friend. And here's the kicker. It happened right in front of me. Yeah, you heard that right. I was in the same room, completely unaware of the nightmare unfolding right under my nose. How twisted is that? But hang on, we're getting ahead of ourselves. To really grasp how messed up this whole thing was, you've got to understand the group of people we hung out with. There were about 10 of us, a tight-knit crew, or so I thought. We did everything together. Holidays, weekends away, dinners at each other's places. Some of us were married, others dating, and then there were a few stuck in that weird limbo in between. Let me introduce you to Greg. Now, Greg, he seemed like a great guy, or at least that's what I believed at the time. He had that kind of charm women love. He could strike up a conversation with anyone and make them feel at ease. But when it came to relationships, the guy was cursed. Every time he got involved with someone, it would blow up in his face. He'd date someone for a few months, then, like clockwork, it'd end in a disaster. He'd laugh it off, saying, well, that's life, isn't it? And we'd all move on like nothing happened. Then there was Greg's sister, Sarah. Now, Sarah, she was a piece of work. She had this magnetic presence, the kind of woman who walks into a room, and suddenly all eyes are on her. She had recently dumped her boyfriend, and for a while, we figured she and Greg would start bringing new dates to our gatherings. But nope. She stayed single, and for some reason, she seemed to enjoy hanging around with us more than actually going out and meeting new people. At the time, it didn't seem like a big deal, but now, well, maybe there was more going on there than I realized. Anyway, about a month before my world blew apart, we all planned this weekend getaway. The whole group. We rented this huge cabin out in the woods. Actually, calling it a cabin doesn't do it justice. It was more like a mansion tucked away in the forest. The place was massive, with so many rooms you could easily get lost. The idea was simple. Escape the daily grind, drink too much, share stupid stories, and just enjoy a break from reality. That first day, it was a blast. The air was crisp, and it felt like the kind of breather we all needed. We drank, we laughed, we sang stupid songs. It was one of those days where you think, yeah, life's pretty damn good. Then nighttime rolled around. We were all lounging in the living room, the fireplace casting this warm glow over the place. Everyone had a drink in hand, still riding the high from earlier. The music was low. Lisa was beside me, smiling like everything in the world was perfect. And then there was Greg. Greg was sitting over there in one of those oversized chairs, holding a beer, looking as relaxed as could be. I glanced over at him and noticed something shiny poking out of his pocket. At first, I thought it was just the light catching on something, but no, there was definitely something there. Now, I wasn't really thinking straight. We were all pretty buzzed, so I did something dumb. I reached over and yanked whatever was out of his pocket without a second thought. And there they were, a pair of women's panties. The room exploded with laughter. I mean, we were drunk, and it just seemed hilarious at the time. I started waving them around, joking. Greg, man, are you expanding your wardrobe or what? Everyone was laughing so hard they could hardly breathe. Greg, though, he played it cool, just smiled and said, "Oh, I found them in one of the rooms. Must have been left behind by whoever stayed here last." And for a moment, I believed him. Then Greg said something I'll never forget. "Hey, maybe they're my sisters. You think she left them lying around?" The whole room exploded with laughter. People were practically on the floor, rolling around, making all kinds of jokes about him spying on his sister or worse. And of course, I joined in too, cracking jokes, playing along like a fool. It was one of those moments where everything just seems light and funny, where you don't realize how serious things actually are, even though looking back I should have. Because here's the kicker. Those panties? They weren't just some random pair. They were Lisa's, my wife's, sitting there in my best friend's pocket. And I had no damn clue, not even the faintest idea. I can't even describe the punch to the gut that hit me when I realized it later. But right then in that moment, I was just another idiot laughing along, thinking it was all one big, harmless joke. After everyone had a good laugh over the whole panty situation and no one claimed them, someone, probably Greg, I can't be sure, came up with this genius idea to burn them. He said something about getting rid of them like they were cursed. We were all drunk and it was late. So, of course, this sounded like a fantastic plan. We all stumbled outside, dragging a bottle of whiskey with us, and made this big scene about it, like it was some kind of ritual. We found the fire pit. Someone lit a small flame, and we all gathered around, grinning like idiots. Greg tossed the panties into the fire, and we cheered like it was some twisted offering to the gods of good times and bad decisions. It was dumb, really. But we were drunk enough that it seemed like the funniest thing in the world. And the worst part? This was just the first night. We had 5 more days ahead in that cabin, and this was only the start. The next morning, we woke up groggy but still in good spirits. We had a full day planned, so we agreed to take it easy on the drinking until later. We went for a hike, had a massive lunch, and eventually settled back into the villa to relax. I was still chuckling to myself about the whole panties incident, never suspecting that anything was off. That is, until I saw something else. We were all hanging out in the living room, half paying attention to some random movie playing on the TV. That's when I noticed something red sticking out from between the couch cushions. My heart skipped a beat, and this strange, sinking feeling started creeping up in my stomach. I reached over and pulled it out, and there it was, a red bra. Not just any red bra, though. It looked a hell of a lot like the panties we'd burned the night before. I didn't want to jump to any conclusions, but the whole thing wasn't sitting right with me. So I turned to Lisa, who was sitting with the others, laughing at something Eric had just said. Holding up the bra, I asked her, "Lisa, is this yours?" She barely glanced at it, smirking like I was being ridiculous. "No, not mine. Just because it's red doesn't mean it's a match, sweetheart." I wasn't ready to let it go that easy. But it looks just like those panties from last night. Same shade of red. Lisa raised an eyebrow and let out this exasperated sigh, like I was testing her patience. "Mark, come on. Just because it's red doesn't mean it's the same. You know how many women own red underwear? What, you think I'd be dumb enough to leave stuff like that lying around? Seriously?" The group started chuckling like it was another funny little moment, and I could feel my face heating up. She was making me look like an idiot in front of everyone, and I knew it. The worst part? I didn't have any proof. We'd burned the damn panties the night before, so now all I had was this nagging feeling in my gut. And what could I do? Push any harder, and I'd look like some jealous, paranoid fool. And she'd just laugh me off again. So I let it go, for the moment. But something wasn't sitting right with me. Later that afternoon, I pulled Eric aside. He was one of the only people in the group I felt like I could trust. Maybe it's because he wasn't as tight with Lisa as the rest of them. I told him everything about the panties, the bra, and how the whole situation was making me suspicious. Eric listened, but when I finished, he just shrugged. Man, I don't think you've got anything to worry about, he said, shaking his head. Lisa's not dumb. If she was cheating, you really think she'd leave evidence lying around like that? Especially when we're all here. I wanted to believe him. Hell, I needed to believe him. But something inside me just wouldn't let it go. The truth is, all these people, Greg, Sarah, the rest, they were Lisa's friends first. I only got to know them because of her. They had their own inside jokes, their own stories from long before I was even part of the picture. Half the time, I felt like I was an outsider in my own damn marriage. So I asked Eric for a favor. Look, man, if I get too drunk tonight, can you keep an eye on Greg and Lisa for me? Just, make sure everything's cool. Eric gave me this look like I was being dramatic, but he nodded. Sure, man. But seriously, I don't think there's anything going on. I wasn't sure about anything anymore. So, I decided to take another step. While everyone else was outside, prepping for another night of drinking, an idea hit me. I remembered that I had an old video recorder stuffed in my backpack. It was the kind with motion sensors, leftover from when I'd upgraded my dashcam. I hadn't meant to bring it, but now it felt like fate. Maybe it was exactly what I needed. I waited until the others were distracted, then quietly slipped back inside. I dug through my bag, found the recorder, and set it up in the corner of the living room. It wasn't perfectly hidden, but nobody would notice unless they were specifically looking for it. Once it was in place, I felt a little more at ease. If something shady was happening, I was going to catch it. What I'd do with the footage, I had no idea, but just knowing it was there gave me some peace of mind. That night, I planned on drinking like everyone else, but this time, I'd be careful. I had an extra set of eyes on Lisa and Greg now, even if they didn't know it. If they were up to something, I wasn't going to be caught in the dark again. By the time the party kicked into full gear, I was already more drunk than I intended to be. The booze hit me harder than I thought, and before long, I found myself stumbling off to my room. I remember collapsing onto the bed, the world spinning in every direction, and then nothing. I was out cold. A bomb could have gone off next to me, and I wouldn't have stirred. I slept like the dead. When I woke up the next morning, the house had that strange, eerie silence you only hear after a night of heavy drinking. Most of the group was already up, nursing hangovers, but nobody else was still sleeping. My head was pounding, but I forced myself to get up and go find Eric. He was sitting outside on the porch, sipping on a cup of coffee, like he didn't have a care in the world. I plopped down next to him, rubbing my temples. How'd things go last night? I tried to sound casual, but the question had more weight than he knew. Eric glanced over at me, shrugged, and said, "Everything was fine, man. Nothing happened. You were out like a rock." I stayed up until the last minute, kept an eye on things, no funny business. His answer should have calmed me, but something didn't sit right. I nodded, thanked him, and headed back inside. That's when I remembered the recorder. My heart started racing as I hurried over to where I'd stashed it. My hands were shaking as I grabbed it and rewound the footage. I skipped through hours of nothing, holding my breath until I found it. The moment I've been waiting for. And what I saw on that tiny screen stopped me cold. The video showed Lisa and me stumbling into the room. But it wasn't really me walking. I was practically being dragged. I was so out of it, I could barely stand, much less know what was happening around me. Lisa led me to the bed, laid me down, and checked if I was completely out cold. She kissed my forehead like I was some helpless child. And then Greg stepped into the frame. He leaned in close, whispered something to Lisa that I couldn't quite make out, and then, this is the part that still haunts me, he kissed me too, right on the cheek, as if I wasn't even a person. Lisa let out a soft laugh, and Greg murmured something that chilled me. "It's wonderful, isn't it?" Then he walked out. I sat there, staring at the screen, completely numb. Eric had lied to me. He'd said nothing happened, but clearly something had. Whether he'd passed out, missed it, or was in on it didn't matter anymore. I knew right then that my marriage was over. But I wasn't ready for the big confrontation yet. I needed to be smart. I needed to make it hurt for them, not just for me. That night, while the group gathered to drink again, I played it cool, kept a low profile, pretended like everything was fine. I watched Lisa and Greg closely, though. They acted like nothing had happened, just laughing and joking along with everyone else. But I wasn't focused on them. Not that night. Then I noticed Sarah quietly slipping out of the room. She didn't say a word, just left without drawing attention. This was my moment. I followed her. I found her in one of the empty bedrooms, sitting on the bed like she'd been waiting for me. She wasn't surprised when I walked in. In fact, she looked at me with this smug, knowing smile that made my skin crawl. She spoke first, her voice low and smooth. "Are you finally ready?" Her words hung in the air, and for a second, I had no idea what she was talking about. Ready for what? But I couldn't afford to show hesitation. Not now. So I steeled myself and said, "Yeah, I'm ready." I wasn't ready. Not in the slightest. But whatever Sarah thought was happening between us, I was about to find out soon enough. Without another word, she stood up and began undressing. It all happened so fast, my brain barely had a chance to process it. I should have stopped her. I should have said something. But instead, I went along with it, like I was possessed by some twisted sense of revenge. Before I knew what was happening, we were having sex, right there in that room. When it was over, regret hit me like a tidal wave. I stood up, ready to get out of there, desperate to put the whole thing behind me. But then Sarah said something that froze me in my tracks. "I'm glad you're finally part of the club. Now we don't have to hide anymore." I stopped dead, hand on the door. "What?" She smiled at me, completely oblivious to the chaos that was brewing inside me. I'm glad Lisa finally told you about it. Keeping our swinger parties a secret from you has been exhausting." Swinger parties. Secret swinger parties. My head was spinning, trying to make sense of what she was saying. Somehow, I managed to keep it together. I forced a smile and nodded like I was in on it. Yeah, she told me. It's a lot to process." Sarah chuckled, clearly relieved. "I'm just glad we don't have to sneak around anymore. And don't worry, I won't tell anyone until you're ready. I know it can be a lot to handle at first." I nodded again, every part of me screaming inside. "Yeah, I appreciate that. I just need some time to adjust." She gave me this sweet, clueless smile. "Of course, take all the time you need." I left the room, my head a whirlwind of confusion, anger, and disbelief. This entire time, there had been an entirely different life happening right in front of me, and I'd been too blind, too trusting to see it. But now I knew. The question was, what the hell was I supposed to do with this knowledge? The next day, I had a plan. After Sarah dropped that bombshell on me, it was clear what I had to do. But I couldn't just go in guns blazing. I needed to be smart about this. If I wanted to see the full scope of what was happening, I needed proof. No one would believe me without it. Hell, I was barely able to believe it myself. So that night, I acted like nothing had changed. I laughed, drank, cracked jokes, and played the part like I didn't know my entire life had been one giant lie. I made a show of getting drunk, stumbling around with a beer in my hand, just like I always did. When it got late, I faked being ready for bed, said goodnight to everyone, and headed to my room. But I wasn't sleeping, not even close. I lay there, wide awake, waiting for it to start. I had my phone ready to go. Earlier, I'd cleared up some space, deleted old videos and photos, just to make sure I'd have enough storage. I'd also downloaded an app that could record in the background without lighting up the screen. I positioned myself carefully, making sure my phone would capture everything. I knew I only had one shot at this. I couldn't afford to mess it up. An hour passed. Then two. The house was dead silent, but I knew it wouldn't stay that way for long. I could hear muffled footsteps and hushed whispers just outside my door. My heart raced, but I forced myself to stay calm. I couldn't blow my cover now. Then it happened. The door creaked open, and I saw Lisa and Greg sneak into the room, followed by a few others from the group. They were whispering and giggling like a bunch of teenagers who thought they were being clever. I kept my breathing slow and steady, pretending to be passed out while they moved around the room. And then the real show began. I'm not going to go into the graphic details, partly because I don't want to get banned from any platform, but also because, honestly, it was beyond disgusting. They were all in on it together. The swinging, the sex, the betrayal. It was more depraved than I could have ever imagined. Watching it unfold made my stomach turn. These people I had trusted, my wife, were doing this right under my nose. I recorded everything. My phone quietly captured it all, the evidence I needed. By the time it was over, I felt like I'd seen enough filth to last a lifetime. My hands were shaking, and it took every ounce of self-control not to burst out of the room right then and there. But I couldn't. Not yet. I had to keep it together just a little longer. When they were finally done and the room emptied out, I didn't waste any time. I packed my things quickly and quietly, making sure I didn't leave anything behind. There was no way in hell I was staying in that house another second. My heart was pounding as I slipped out into the night, unnoticed. Honestly, I don't even think anyone would have cared if they saw me leaving. They were too wrapped up in their sick little world to notice much else. The villa was a good few kilometers from where we'd parked the cars, down a long, winding dirt road through the forest. Walking through those woods in the dead of night, with nothing but the moonlight filtering through the trees, was nerve-wracking, to say the least. Every snap of a branch or rustle of leaves had me on edge. But none of that mattered. My mind was miles away, stuck replaying everything I had just witnessed. As I trudged through that dark, eerie forest, all I could think about was my next move. The footage on my phone was just the beginning. I wanted more than proof of Lisa's betrayal. I needed to hit them where it hurt, to make sure they felt even a fraction of the pain I'd been drowning in for hours. By the time I reached my car, the fear that had been creeping in earlier was gone. I was laser-focused. I knew what I had to do next, and I wasn't just going to hurt them. I was going to destroy them. Driving home through the empty, silent streets felt surreal, like I was floating in some kind of twisted dream, or more like a nightmare I couldn't wake up from. My head was swirling with everything that had unfolded in the past 24 hours, and the weight of it all was suffocating. When I finally parked in front of my house, I sat in the car for a minute, engine still running, staring at the dark outline of my home. I was trying to calm the storm inside me, but no amount of deep breathing was going to erase what I had seen, or what I now knew. The moment I stepped inside, my phone started buzzing like crazy. It had been silent the whole drive, but now it was lighting up with notifications, missed calls, texts. I knew exactly what was happening. Someone in that house, one of those backstabbing people I used to call friends, had noticed I wasn't where they left me, passed out and clueless, and they were freaking out. I didn't bother checking the messages right away. I was already ahead of them. I went straight to my desk, still wearing my jacket, mind racing as I flipped open my laptop. There was no way I was going to keep this all bottled up inside. But this wasn't just about getting it off my chest. It was about control. For the first time in a long time, I was holding all the cards, and I wasn't about to let them slip through my fingers. That said, I wasn't going to dump all my ammunition just yet. I needed to be strategic. I needed to make my move count. I started typing. The post was brief, but sharp. I wasn't about to lay out all the dirty details right away. This was more of a teaser, something to get under their skin. I described betrayal, lies, and how I'd uncovered things that were never meant for me to see. I left out the explicit stuff, both because it could get me banned and because I wanted to let their imaginations run wild. Just enough to stir up curiosity, fear, and panic. But that wasn't the end game. I had the footage, the real proof of everything that had gone down. The things I'd captured through that lens were way too explicit to post in full. So, I uploaded the video to a hidden link. It wasn't public. I wasn't reckless. But I made it clear, if anyone wanted the truth, if they were brave enough to ask for it, they could message me, and I'd send them the link. A small part of me relished the thought of them squirming, knowing what I'd seen, knowing what I held. The post itself was anonymous. I created a burner account, no profile picture, no name, nothing that could be traced back to me. But let's be honest, it wasn't going to take long for those so-called friends to figure out who had posted it. No one else had access to the video, and no one else could have pulled this off. When they pieced it together, I knew they'd panic. Once everything was in place, I hit post. Then I leaned back in my chair, the adrenaline still coursing through me. It felt like I just crossed a line, one I couldn't uncross, but I didn't care. I had set things in motion, and there was no going back now. That night, sleep was impossible. I tossed and turned, my mind racing with what I'd done and what was coming next. By the time morning rolled around, my phone was blowing up. Missed calls, voicemails, texts. They were all flooding in, wave after wave. I grabbed my phone and scrolled through the messages. The names on the screen told me everything I needed to know. Eric, Greg, Sarah. They were all blowing up my phone, panicked. I didn't bother listening to the voicemails. I already knew what they were going to say. The texts, though, were a sight to behold. My so-called friends were furious. Threats, insults, accusations, calling me out for airing their dirty laundry in public. They were terrified that I was about to blow up their lives, ruin their reputations with the video, and expose their twisted little secrets to the world. They knew what I had done, and they were desperate to stop me from doing more damage. But it was far too late for that. I had the upper hand, and they knew it. What surprised me the most was Lisa. Not a single call or text from her. Nothing. I didn't know if she was trying to play it cool or if she was terrified of what I had on her. But the silence from her was deafening. As my phone kept buzzing, I realized this was just the beginning. Their threats didn't faze me. In fact, I'd been expecting them. They thought they could intimidate me into backing down, but they had no idea I was already way past that point. I couldn't afford to waste any more time. There was one last thing I had to take care of that morning. I grabbed my phone, scrolled through the contacts, and found the number of a lawyer I'd been meaning to call for months. No more hesitation. I dialed the number and got straight to the point. I wasn't in the mood for small talk or drawn-out explanations. I told him I needed divorce papers prepared, and I wanted it done quickly. No loopholes, no delays. The marriage was dead, and there was no way I was letting Lisa walk away without facing the consequences. By the time I hung up, the constant stream of calls and texts had finally slowed down. But I knew this was just a temporary lull. The storm wasn't over yet. The damage was done, and I wasn't going to stop until I had everything I needed to leave this wreck of a life behind for good. As I stared at my phone, watching the occasional message still pop up, it hit me. This was just the beginning. The real fallout was about to unfold. When Lisa finally showed up, I was ready. I'd spent most of the day packing her things, tossing everything she owned into boxes without any care. I didn't bother being neat or organized. I just wanted her gone. The place looked like a tornado had torn through it. Boxes stacked messily by the front door, her clothes thrown in without a second thought. I wasn't trying to be considerate anymore. I was done. She walked in like she still had control, scanning the room, probably expecting some sort of argument or negotiation. But when she saw those boxes, reality started to sink in. She tried to talk, acting like there was some kind of misunderstanding, like we could work things out. Maybe she thought she could charm her way out of this, the same way she had with every other mess in our marriage. I didn't give her the chance. Before she could get more than a few words out, I looked her straight in the eye and said, "Go to hell." She froze, not expecting me to be so blunt. And she wasn't alone. She had brought some of her so-called friends with her, the same ones I once thought were my friends, too. They stood behind her, smirking like they had something on me, like they could intimidate me into backing down. Eric, the smug ringleader, stepped forward with that cocky look on his face. "You're gonna regret this, man. You think you can just screw with people's lives like this?" I didn't even blink. At this point, I was so far beyond caring. "If you don't get out of here right now, I'm calling the cops," I said, my voice calm, but sharp enough that they knew I wasn't bluffing. They hesitated, glancing at each other, unsure if I was serious. Then Lisa, still trying to salvage the situation, stepped in, attempting to reason with me one last time. but I wasn't interested in anything she had to say. I pointed at the door and told her to get out. She paused, but in the end, they all slinked away, muttering insults and threats under their breath as they left. I slammed the door behind them, the sound echoing through the empty house. I wish I could say that was the end of it, but it wasn't. They didn't sue me like I half expected, but the threats didn't stop. Every now and then, I'd get a call or a text from an unknown number. Nothing direct, just vague threats designed to rattle me. They wanted me to feel scared, but honestly, I was too tired to care. Reporting it to the police felt like a waste of energy. It was just noise at this point. The divorce, thankfully, went through fast. There wasn't much for us to fight over. Lisa knew she didn't have a leg to stand on, and I wasn't about to drag it out. A few weeks later, the papers were signed, and just like that, it was over. As soon as the ink was dry, I moved fast. I put the house up for sale, and it didn't take long to find a buyer. Good riddance to the place. It was full of too many memories, too much hurt. I didn't want any part of it anymore. Within weeks, I packed up what was left of my life and left. I moved to another state, far from the place where everything had fallen apart. I didn't tell anyone where I was going. Not that they would have cared. I just needed to get away from it all, to start fresh somewhere new, somewhere no one knew my story. But no matter how far I try to run, those last few days still cling to me like a bad dream I can't wake up from. It's seared into my mind, an image I can't shake no matter how much I wish it would fade. Every time I shut my eyes, it all comes flooding back. I keep telling myself that time will dull it, that one day it won't hurt this much. But for now, it's still raw, still too fresh to let go. I suppose this is where my story wraps up, though. I don't have any grand plans for the future, but I can say one thing with absolute certainty. I won't be letting anyone get that close to me again. After what went down, I can't. So, if you've taken the time to read this, I want to thank you. And if I can leave you with one piece of advice, watch who you trust. Because sometimes, the ones you think are your safety net are the very ones waiting to pull the rug out from under you. Update. It's been a few months since I packed up everything I had and left the life I thought I knew behind. The house, the so-called friends, the memories, they're all in the past now, in my rearview mirror. I've settled in a small, quiet town far from the mess I left behind. It's peaceful here. No one knows who I am, and no one gives a damn about my past. That's exactly what I need right now. On the outside, things look fine. I've got a new job that doesn't remind me of everything I lost, and I'm slowly adjusting to this new routine. The folks here are friendly enough, but I keep my distance. It's not that I don't want to connect with people. I just don't know how to anymore. Trust feels like some fragile, foreign thing I can't grasp. Whenever someone tries to get too close, I instinctively pull back, putting up walls I didn't even know I had. The nightmares haven't stopped either. They're not about the actual events, but there's this constant feeling of betrayal lurking in them, like I can't let my guard down, not even when I'm asleep. It's as if a part of me is always bracing for the next blow. I keep replaying those moments, Lisa, Greg, and the whole twisted lot of them, and the wounds still feel as fresh as ever. It's like this scar that refuses to heal, no matter how much I try to convince myself I've escaped. I met a few people in this new town, and they've been kind enough inviting me for drinks or to hang out. But every time, I find a reason to stay home. It's not that I don't want to be around anyone. It's just that I don't trust myself to let them in. I keep wondering, what if it happens again? What if the next person I trust turns out to be another Lisa, another Greg? So, I keep to myself. I go to work, come home, and try to focus on rebuilding the parts of my life that aren't completely shattered. It's lonely, sure, but it feels safer this way. I don't have the energy to risk getting hurt like that again. Not now. Maybe someday, I'll learn how to trust again. Maybe someone will come along who can break through this wall I've built up around me. But for now, I'm okay with the distance. It's better to be alone than to risk being destroyed all over again. So, this is where I am now. Life isn't perfect, but at least it's mine again. I don't have to constantly look over my shoulder, and I don't have to worry about what's being whispered behind my back. For now, that's enough. To anyone reading this, just be careful. Guard your heart, because once it's shattered the way mine was, putting the pieces back together isn't something that comes easily.